Hello, nerds! Nerds for humanity. We are going to talk about the Trump Jan 6 indictment. Now, I'll be honest with you, I was originally going to do a whole thing on the latest POTUS 2024 polling, which I'll have to do in a separate stream because, you know, the whole J6 indictment coming down today, I feel like it would be weird not to cover it. But this is going to be different than any other Jan 6 coverage that you will be watching or seeing elsewhere on the interweb. I'm not going to summarize it. I'm not going to just give opinions about it. I'm not going to use Republican or Democratic talking points. We're just going to look at the actual original document, the indictment itself. We're not going to just kind of poke holes in it, but we're going to go through the whole thing. And I don't know if I'll go through every line, but we're going to go through every page and see what it says. And then you can draw your own conclusions on whether you think the indictment's credible and whether or not this should have gone to court or not. But we'll look at it together. So hopefully we will reduce some of the bias and spin and just look at the document itself. That said, let's acknowledge that this is an indictment document. So this is going to be the prosecution's argument about why this thing should go to trial, and it's not going to be the Trump defense document. If that were available, we would go through that as well. But this is the way the legal proceedings work. So the question here isn't, do you think Trump is for sure guilty? But it's like, do you think there was enough weirdness that this deserves to be heard in a court of law? So let's pull it up and get right into it. And by the way, if you are catching this kind of on the random in your feed and you're not subscribed to Nerds for Humanity, do me a solid. And if at any point during this stream you're like, hey, this is kind of useful, hit that sub button, smash the like button, and then comment below if there's other topics you want me to hit, or if you agree or disagree with this indictment. Okay, with that said, let's just jump right into it. So this is the District of Columbia District Court, United States of America versus Donald J. Trump. Wow. It's right off the bat. Can't believe we're here, finally. Okay, now this isn't like the state of Georgia. This is the United States of America, federal case. Okay, so introduction. The defendant lost the 2020 election. Despite having lost, the defendant was determined to remain in power. So for more than 2 months following the election day on November 30th, 2020, the defendant spread lies that there had been outcome determinative fraud in the election, that he had actually won. These claims were false, and the defendant knew that they were false. But he repeated and widely disseminated them anyway to make his knowingly false claims appear legitimate, create an intense national atmosphere of mistrust and anger, and erode public faith in the administration of the election. You know, it does sound like he kind of did that. The defendant had a right, like every American, to speak publicly about the election and even to claim falsely that there had been outcome determinative fraud during the election that he won. He was also entitled to formally challenge the results through lawful and appropriate means, by seeking recounts, audits of the popular vote in states, or filing lawsuits challenging ballots and procedures. Indeed, in many cases, the defendant did pursue these methods. His efforts to change the outcome in any state through recounts, audits, or legal challenges were uniformly unsuccessful. Shortly after Election Day, the defendant also pursued unlawful means of discounting legitimate votes and subverting the election results. In doing so, he perpetrated 3 criminal conspiracies. A conspiracy to defraud the U.S. by using dishonesty, fraud, and deceit to impair, obstruct, and defeat the lawful federal government function by which the results of the presidential election are collected, counted, and certified, in violation of 18 U.S.C. 371. Secondly, a conspiracy to corruptly obstruct and impede the January 6th congressional proceeding at which the collected results of the presidential election are counted and certified, in violation of 18 U.S.C. 1512K. Third, a conspiracy against the right to vote and have one's vote counted, in violation of 18 U.S.C. 241. Each of these conspiracies, which built on widespread mistrust the defendant was creating through pervasive and destabilizing lies about election fraud. Oh, this is great. Let's just take a quick break here. This is great. Because in order for him to defend himself, the president now can get what he and his followers have been asking for. He can prove that what he was saying was not a lie, but was true. You know, a lot of Trump supporters, including members of my own family who are huge Trump fans, they will say, well, Tom, you know, we never had standing in court, or the court never gave us a chance to show our evidence. Well, bro, now's your chance. Put up or shut up. Anyway, each of these conspiracies, which built on the widespread mistrust of the defendant was created through pervasive and destabilizing lies, targeted a bedrock function of the federal government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying results of the presidential election. Okay, then it says, Donald Trump did knowingly combine, conspire, confederate, and agree with co-conspirators, known and unknown to the grand jury, to defraud the U.S. by using dishonesty, fraud, deceit to impair, obstruct, and defeat the lawful federal government function by which results of the presidential election are collected, counted, and certified. The purpose of this conspiracy was to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 election by using knowingly false claims of fraud to obstruct the federal government function by which those results are collected, counted, and certified. He enlisted co-conspirators to assist him in his criminal efforts to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 election and remain in power. Among those were co-conspirator 1, an attorney who was willing to spread knowingly false claims and pursue strategies that the defendant's 2020 election campaign attorneys would not. So co-conspirator 1 was a lawyer who was willing to do stuff that even Trump's own re-election campaign attorneys would not do. Co-conspirator 2, another attorney who devised and attempted to implement a strategy to leverage the VP's ceremonial role overseeing the certification, proceeding to obstruct the certification of the presidential election. Co-conspirator 3, another attorney whose unfounded claims of election fraud the defendant privately acknowledged to others sounded, quote, crazy. Nonetheless, the defendant embraced and publicly amplified co-conspirator 3's disinformation. Co-conspirator 4, a Justice Department official who worked on civil matters and who, with the defendant, attempted to use the Justice Department to open sham election crime investigations and influence state legislatures with knowingly false claims of fraud. Co-conspirator 5, another attorney who assisted in devising and attempting to implement a plan to submit fraudulent slates of presidential electors to obstruct the certification proceeding. And co-conspirator 6, a political consultant who helped implement a plan to submit fraudulent slates of presidential electors to obstruct the certification proceeding. Okay, so far we've got 3 counts. One is defrauding the United States to defeat the lawful federal government function of an election. Count 2 is a conspiracy to corrupt and obstruct the Jan 6 congressional proceedings. And count 3 is a conspiracy against every American citizen's right to vote and to have your vote counted. And then there's a bunch of co-conspirators This is his dream team. Then it goes on to say the federal function, basically it looks like, they're supposed to run the election. The require on the 6th January, the following election day, the Congress meet in joint session presided over by the VP to count the electoral votes, resolve any objections, and announce the result. The federal government function is foundational to the democratic process, and until Trump had operated in a peaceful and orderly manner for more than 130 years. Manner and means. Okay, so how did he do these things? Well, according to the indictment, Trump and co-conspirators used knowingly false claims of election fraud to get state legislators and election officials to subvert the legitimate results and change electoral votes for the defendant's opponent to electoral votes for the defendant. The defendant pushed officials in certain states to ignore the popular vote, disenfranchise millions of voters, dismiss legitimate electors, and ultimately cause the ascertainment of and voting by illegitimate electors in favor of Trump. So basically messing with the state electoral count. They also organized fraudulent slates of electors in 7 states: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, attempting to mimic the procedures that legitimate electors were supposed to follow. This included causing the fraudulent electors to meet on the day appointed by federal law on which legitimate electors were to gather, cast fraudulent votes for Trump, and sign certificates falsely representing that they were legitimate electors. I mean, you want to talk about if he did what's stated in B, what is the irony of the MAGA people talking about stop the steal? They were the ones who were trying to create fake electoral votes and submitting them and trying to certify them as real. Stop the steal my butt, dude. All right, let's keep going. The defendant and co-conspirators attempted to use the power and authority of the Justice Department to conduct sham election crime investigations and to send a letter to targeted states that falsely claim that the Justice Department had identified significant concerns that may have impacted the election outcome, that sought to advance the defendant's fraudulent elector plan by using the Justice Department's authority to falsely present fraudulent electors as a valid alternative. So you talk about weaponizing the Justice Department. This is it. When you tell your Justice Department to bully states and to kind of conduct sham investigations so that those states are not going to follow through with what their voters chose and who their voters chose, like, that's weaponizing the Justice Department. So far, 2 for 2 in terms of pot calling the kettle black. I mean, it's worse than pot calling the kettle black. It's like the pot calling the kettle a pot. It's crazy. The defendant and co-conspirators attempted to enlist the vice president to use his ceremonial role to fraudulently alter election results. First, using knowingly false claims on election fraud, the defendant attempted to convince the VP to use the defendant's fraudulent electors, reject legitimate electoral votes, or send those electoral votes to state legislators for review rather than counting them. When that failed, the defendant repeated knowingly false claims, so falsely told gathered supporters that the vice president had the authority to alter the election results and directed them to the Capitol to obstruct the certification proceedings and exert pressure on the VP to take the fraudulent actions he had already refused. After it became public on the afternoon of Jan 6 that the vice president would not alter the results, a large and angry crowd, including many individuals whom Trump had deceived into believing the VP could and might change the results, violently attacked the Capitol and halted the proceeding. As violence ensued, the defendant and co-conspirators exploited the disruption by redoubling efforts to levy false claims of election fraud and convinced members of Congress to further delay the certification based on those claims. So again, for all of those who thought, oh, the vice president has the right to turn over the results of the election and he could have refused to certify, oh, well, now you have your chance. You can go to federal court and argue probably in front of the Supreme Court and once and for all confirm or deny whether the VP has the right or not to unilaterally decline to certify a presidential election. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine if Vice President Joe Biden declined to certify Donald Trump's first election? Like, can you imagine what the MAGA would have said? They would have been like deep state, right? Okay. All right, I promise not to get too opinionated, but, you know, how can I not? This is like, it's just our Constitution. It's just the peaceful transfer of power. It's just the President of the United States trying to illegally remain in office after getting voted out. 3-time loser. Ridiculous. Okay. The defendants, his co-conspirators, and their agents made knowingly false claims that there had been outcome determinative fraud in the 2020 election. These prolific lies included dozens of specific claims that had been substantial fraud in certain states, such as large numbers of dead, non-resident, non-citizen, ineligible voters had cast ballots, or that voting machines had been changed for the defendant to the votes for Biden. These claims were false, and the defendant knew that they were false. In fact, the defendant was notified repeatedly that his claims were untrue, often by the people on whom he relied on candid advice on important matters and who are best positioned to know the facts, and he deliberately disregarded the truth. For instance, the defendant's vice president, who personally stood to gain by remaining in office as part of the defendant's ticket and whom the defendant asked to study fraud allegations, told Trump that he had seen no evidence of outcome determinative fraud. The senior leaders of the Justice Department, appointed by Trump and responsible for investigating credible allegations of crimes, told Trump on multiple occasions that various allegations of fraud were unsupported. The director of national intelligence, Trump's own principal advisor on intelligence matters related to national security, disabused Trump of the notion that the intelligence community's findings regarding foreign interference would change the outcome of the election. The Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, whose existence the defendant Trump signed into law to protect the nation's cybersecurity infrastructure from attack, joined an official multi-agency statement that there was no evidence any voting system had been compromised, and had declared the 2020 election the most secure in American history. Days later, the CISA director, whom the defendant had appointed, announced publicly that election security experts were in agreement that claims of computer-based election fraud were unsubstantiated. And then, of course, Trump fired him. Senior White House attorneys, selected by the defendant to provide him candid advice, informed Trump that there was no evidence of outcome determinative election fraud and told him that his presidency would end on Inauguration Day 2021. Senior staffers on Trump's 2020 re-election campaign, whose sole mission was Trump's re-election, told him on November 7th, 2020, that he had only 5 to 10% chance of prevailing in the election and that success was contingent on the defendant winning ongoing vote counts or litigation in Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin. Within a week of that assessment, the defendant lost in Arizona, meaning he had lost the election. State legislators and officials, many of whom were Trump allies, had voted for him and had wanted him to be reelected, repeatedly informed Trump that his claims of fraud in their states were unsubstantiated or false, and resisted his pressure to act based upon them. State and federal courts, neutral arbiters responsible for ensuring fair administration of law, rejected every single outcome determinative post-election lawsuit filed by Trump, Trump co-conspirators, Trump allies, providing Trump real-time notice that his allegations were entirely meritless. Nonetheless, Trump widely disseminated his false claims for months, despite the fact he still does it today, despite the fact that he knew, and in many cases had been informed directly, that they were not true. The defendant's knowingly false statements were integral to his criminal plans to defeat the federal government function, obstruct certification, and interfere with others' right to vote. Brandon, why are you standing outside my window? I'm streaming. Are you locked out? Okay, guys, I have to let my child in. He's locked out. I'll be right back. All right. The defendant insinuated that more than 10,000 dead voters had voted in Georgia. Just 4 days earlier, Georgia's Secretary of State had explained to Trump that this was false. Georgia's Secretary of State, not California's, Georgia's. The defendant asserted that there were 205,000 more votes than voters in Pennsylvania. Trump's acting attorney general and acting deputy attorney general, his own deputy attorney general and attorney general, explained to him that this was not true. He then told his followers that there had been a suspicious vote dump in Detroit, Michigan. The defendant's own attorney general, Trump's attorney general, had explained to the defendant that this was false, and the defendant's allies in Michigan state legislature, the Speaker of the House and Majority Leader of the Senate, allies of Trump, publicly announced there was no evidence of substantial fraud in the state of Michigan. Trump then claimed that there had been tens of thousands of double votes and other fraud in Nevada. The Nevada Secretary of State previously rebutted Trump's fraud claims by publicly posting a facts versus myths document explaining that Nevada judges had reviewed and rejected them, and the Nevada State Court had rendered a decision denying such claims. The defendant then said that more than 30,000 non-citizens had voted in Arizona. Trump's own campaign manager explained to him that such claims were false, and the Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives, who had been a Trump supporter, had issued a public statement that there was no evidence of substantial fraud in Arizona. Trump then asserted that voting machines in various states had switched votes from defendant to Biden. Trump's own attorney general, his own acting attorney general, his own acting deputy attorney general, all of them explained to him that this was false. And numerous recounts and audits had confirmed the accuracy of voting machines. And if you don't believe me, and if you don't believe this indictment, ask Fox News why they paid almost $1 billion to settle their own Dominion lawsuit. Okay. Shortly after Election Day, which fell on November 3rd, 2020, Trump launched his criminal scheme. On November 13th, Trump's campaign attorneys conceded in court that he had lost the vote count in the state of Arizona. Meaning, based on the assessment of Trump's own campaign advisors, the defendant had lost the election. So the next day, Trump turned to co-conspirator 1, whom he announced would spearhead his efforts going forward to challenge the results, From that point on, Trump and his co-conspirators executed a strategy to use knowing deceit in the targeted states to impair, obstruct, and defeat the federal government function, including as described below. On November 13th, Trump had a conversation with his campaign manager who informed him that a claim that had been circulating that a substantial number of non-citizens voting in Arizona was false. This is from his own campaign manager. On November 2022, 8 days before Arizona's governor certified the ascertainment of the state's legitimate electors, Trump and co-conspirator one called the Speaker of the Arizona House and made knowingly false claims of fraud aimed at interfering with the ascertainment of and voting by Arizona's electors. Trump falsely asserted that a substantial number of non-citizens, non-residents, and dead people had voted fraudulently. The House Speaker asked co-conspirator one for evidence of these claims, which co-conspirator one did not have but claimed he would provide. Shockingly, co-conspirator one never did so, never provided a single shred of evidence. Trump and co-conspirator one asked the House Speaker to call the legislature into session and hold a hearing based on their claims and assertions of fraud. The Speaker refused, saying that doing so required 2/3 vote of its members, and he would not allow it without actual evidence. You know, evidence? Not just talking, but actual proof. The defendant and co-conspirator one asked Arizona House Speaker to use the legislature to circumvent the process by which legitimate electors would be ascertained for Biden based on the popular vote and replace those with electors from a new slate for Trump. The Speaker refused, responding that suggestion was beyond anything he had ever heard or thought of as something within his authority. On December 1, co-conspirator one met with the Arizona House Speaker when the Speaker again asked co-conspirator one, where's the beef? Where's the evidence for outcome determinative fraud that he and Trump had been claiming? Co-conspirator one responded with words to the effect of, we don't have the evidence, but we have lots of theories. Well, sir, theories are not what make the world go around. You actually have to have evidence. That's the scientific method. On December 4th, the Speaker issued a public statement where he said, no election is perfect, and if there were evidence of illegal votes, the Arizona law provides a process to contest, but the law does not authorize a legislature to reverse results of an election. As a conservative Republican, I don't like the results. I voted for Trump and worked hard to re-elect him, but I cannot and will not entertain a suggestion that we violate current law to change the outcome of a certified election. I and my fellow legislators swore an oath to support the U.S. Constitution and the Constitution and laws of the state of Arizona. It would violate that oath, the basic principles of Republican government, and the rule of law if we attempted to nullify the people's vote based on unsupported theories of fraud. Under the laws that we wrote and voted upon, Arizona voters choose who wins, and our system requires that their choice be respected. On the morning of Jan 4th, God, this guy, they won't stop. Co-conspirator 2 called Arizona House Speaker to urge him to use a majority of the legislature to decertify the state's electors. Arizona's validly ascertained electors had voted 3 weeks earlier and sent their votes to Congress, which was scheduled to count those votes in Biden's favor in just 2 days' time at the Jan 6 certification. When the Arizona House Speaker explained that state investigations had uncovered no evidence of substantial fraud, co-conspirator 2 conceded that he didn't know enough about facts on the ground in Arizona, but nonetheless told the Arizona Speaker to decertify and let the courts sort it out. The Arizona House Speaker refused, stating that he would not play with the oath he had taken to uphold the United States Constitution and Arizona law. On Jan 6, the defendant publicly repeated the knowingly false claim that 36,000 non-citizens had voted in Arizona. On November 16, 2020, on the defendant's behalf, his executive assistant sent co-conspirator 3 and others a document containing bullet points critical of critical of a certain voting machine company, writing, "See attached. Please include as is or almost as is in lawsuit." Co-conspirator 3 responded 9 minutes later. "It must go in all suits in Georgia and PA immediately, with a fraud claim that requires the entire election to be set aside in those states and machines impounded for nonpartisan professional inspection." On November 25th, co-conspirator 3 filed a lawsuit against the governor of Georgia alleging massive election fraud accomplished through the voting machine company's election software and hardware. Before the lawsuit was even filed, the defendant retweeted a post promoting it. Trump did this despite the fact that when he had discussed with co-conspirator 3's far-fetched public claims regarding the voting machine company in private with his own advisors, Trump had conceded that they were unsupported and co-conspirator 3 sounded crazy. Co-conspirator 3's Georgia lawsuit was then dismissed on December 7th. On December 3rd, co-conspirator 1 orchestrated a presentation to a judiciary subcommittee of the Georgia State Senate with the intention of misleading state senators into blocking the ascertainment of legitimate electors. During the presentation, an agent of the defendant and co-conspirator 1 falsely claimed that more than 10,000 dead people voted. That afternoon, senior advisor to Trump told the defendant's chief of staff through text messages, "Just an FYI, a campaign lawyer and his team verified that the 10K plus supposed dead people voting in Georgia is not accurate. It was alleged in co-conspirator 1's hearing today." The senior advisor clarified that he believed the actual number was 12. Not 10,000, but 12. Another agent of Trump and co-conspirator 1 played a misleading excerpt of a video recording of ballot counting in State Farm Arena in Atlanta and insinuated that it showed election workers counting suitcases of illegal ballots. Co-conspirator 2 encouraged legislators to decertify the election based on false complaints of fraud. Also on December 3rd, Trump issued a tweet amplifying knowingly false claims in co-conspirator 1's presentation. "Wow, blockbuster testimony taking place right now in Georgia. Ballot stuffing by Dems when Republicans were forced to leave the large counting room. Plenty more coming, but this alone leads to an easy win of the state." On December 4th, Georgia's Secretary of State's COO debunked the claims made at co-conspirator 1's presentation, issuing a tweet stating the 90-second video of election workers at State Farm Arena purporting to show fraud was watched in its entirety, hours, by Georgia Secretary of State investigators. Shows normal ballot processing. Here is a fact check on it. On December 7th, he reiterated during a press conference that the claim that there had been misconduct at State Farm Arena was false. Nevertheless, on December 8th, Trump called the Georgia Attorney General to pressure him to support an election filed in Supreme Court by another state's Attorney General. The Georgia Attorney General told Trump that officials had already investigated various claims of fraud in the state and were not seeing evidence. On December 8th, a senior campaign advisor who spoke with Trump on a daily basis and informed him on multiple occasions that various fraud claims were not true, expressed frustration that many of co-conspirator 1 and his legal team's claims could not be substantiated. As early as mid-November, senior campaign advisor had informed Trump that his claims of large number of dead voters in Georgia was untrue. With respect to the persistent claim regarding State Farm Arena, on December 8th, the Trump senior campaign advisor wrote in an email, quote, "When our research and campaign legal team can't back up any of the claims made by our elite strike force legal team, you can see why we're 0 for 32 on our cases. I'll obviously hustle to help on all fronts, but it's tough to own any of this when it's all just conspiracy shit. beamed down from the mothership. Sorry for my French, but that's what they said in the email. This is Trump's own team talking about Trump's 0 for 32 cases and the quote-unquote elite strike force legal team. And I think that's like Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, Jennifer something, the elite team. Conspiracy shit beamed down from the mothership. On December 10th, 4 days before Biden's validly ascertained electors were scheduled to cast votes and send them to Congress, co-conspirator 1 appeared at a hearing before the Georgia House of Representatives Government Affairs Committee. Co-conspirator 1 played the State Farm video again, falsely claimed that it showed voter fraud right in front of people's eyes, and it was just the tip of the iceberg. He then cited 2 election workers by name, baselessly accusing them of quite obviously surreptitiously passing around USB ports as if they are vials of heroin or cocaine, and suggested that they were criminals whose places of work, their homes, should have been searched for evidence of ballots, for evidence of USB ports, for evidence of voter fraud. Thereafter, the 2 election workers received numerous death threats. On December 15th, the defendants summoned the incoming Attorney General and incoming acting Deputy Attorney General and others to the Oval Office to discuss allegations of fraud. During that meeting, the Justice Department officials specifically refuted Trump's claims about State Farm Arena, explaining to him that the activity shown on the tape was benign. On December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, a day after Trump's own chief of staff personally observed the signature verification process at the Cobb County Civic Center and notified Trump that the state election officials were conducting themselves in an exemplary fashion and would find fraud if it existed, Trump tweeted that Georgia officials administering the signature process were trying to hide evidence of election fraud and were, quote, terrible people. On December 27th, Trump spoke with acting Attorney General and acting Deputy Attorney General. During the call, Trump again pressed the unfounded claims regarding State Farm Arena, and the 2 top justice officials again rebutted the allegations, telling him that the Justice Department had reviewed videotape, the Justice Department had interviewed witnesses, and had not identified any suspicious conduct. On December 31st, God, this guy is like the Energizer Bunny. Like, imagine if Trump had fought this hard for America versus trying to overturn his own damn election. On December 31st, the defendants signed a verification affirming false election fraud allegations made on his behalf in a lawsuit filed in his name against the governor of Georgia. In advance of the filing, co-conspirator 2, who was advising Trump on the lawsuit, acknowledged in an email that he and Trump had, since signing a previous verification, been made aware that some of the allegations and evidence proffered by the experts has been inaccurate, and signing a new affirmation with that knowledge would not be accurate. The defendant and co-conspirator 2 caused the defendant's signed verification to be filed nonetheless. Trump still filed it knowing that the information in there was not accurate. On January 2nd, 4 days before Congress's certification, the defendant and others called Georgia's Secretary of State. During the call, the defendant lied. Trump lied to the Georgia Secretary of State to induce him to alter Georgia's vote count and call into question the validity of Biden's electors' votes, which had been transmitted to Congress weeks before, including as follows. Trump raised allegations regarding State Farm Arena video and repeatedly disparaged one of the same election workers that co-conspirator 1 had maligned on December 10th, using her name 20 times and falsely referring to her as a professional vote scammer and hustler. In response, the Georgia Secretary of State refused this, You're talking about the State Farm video, and I think it's extremely unfortunate that co-conspirator one or his people, they sliced and diced that video and they took it out of context. When the Georgia Secretary of State then offered a link to a video that would disprove co-conspirator one's claims, Trump responded, "I don't care about a link. I don't need it. I have a much better link." This is the guy that half of the country wants to go back to the White House. Unbelievable, this piece of work. The defendant asked about rumors that paper ballots cast in the election were being destroyed, and Georgia Secretary of State's counsel explained to him that the claim had been investigated was not true. Then Trump claimed that 5,000 dead people voted in Georgia, causing the Secretary of State to respond, "Mr. President, the challenge that you have is that the data you have is wrong. The actual number is two. Two people that were dead that voted. And so your information is wrong. It's 2, not 5,000. The defendant claimed that thousands of out-of-state voters had cast ballots, which Georgia's Secretary of State counsel refuted, explaining, quote, "We've been going through each of those as well, and those numbers that we got, the defendant's counsel was just saying, they're also not accurate. Everyone we've been through are people that lived in Georgia, moved to a different state, then moved back to Georgia legitimately. They moved back years ago. This was not like something just before the election." In response to multiple other of Trump's allegations, the Georgia Secretary of State's counsel told Trump that the Georgia Bureau of Investigation would examining all claims and finding no merit to them. Finally, Trump said, look, he needed to find 11,780 votes and insinuated that the Georgia Secretary of State and his counsel could be subject to criminal prosecution if they failed to find the fraud that he demanded, stating, quote, "And you are going to find that they are, which is totally illegal. It's more illegal for you than it is for them because you know what they did and you're not reporting it. That's criminal, you know. That's a criminal offense. And you can't let that happen. That's a big risk to you and to the Georgia Secretary of State's counsel, your lawyer." Basically twisting the Georgia Secretary of State. Like all of this Republican talk about states' rights, but at the end of the day, like you have a Republican president trying to overturn his own election defeat by telling a state that they don't like how the state's citizens voted and that if you don't turn it over, I'm going to come after you. And I don't care that my facts are wrong and I made everything up. The next day on Jan 3rd, Trump falsely claimed that the Georgia Secretary of State had not addressed Trump's allegations, publicly stating that the Georgia Secretary of State, quote, was unwilling or unable to answer questions such as ballots under the table scam, ballot destruction, out-of-state voters, dead voters, and more. He has no clue, exclamation point. On Jan 6, the defendant publicly repeated the knowingly false information that more than 10,300 dead people voted in Georgia. On November 5th, Trump claimed that there had been suspicious dump of votes. In Detroit, there were hours of unexplained delay in delivering many of the voters for counting. The final batch did not arrive until 4 in the morning, even though the polls were closed at 8 o'clock. So they brought it in, and the batches came in, and nobody knew where they came from. On November 20th, 3 days before Michigan's governor signed a certificate of ascertainment, notifying the federal government that based on popular vote, Biden's electors were to represent Michigan's voters, the defendant held a meeting in the Oval Office with the Speaker of the Michigan House of Representatives and the Majority Leader of the Michigan Senate. In the meeting, Trump raised his false claim of an illegitimate vote dump in Detroit. In response, Michigan's Senate Majority Leader told Trump that he had lost Michigan, not because of fraud, but because Trump had underperformed with certain voter populations in the state. Upon leaving their meeting, the Michigan House Speaker and the Michigan Senate Majority Leader issued a statement reiterating this. The Senate and House Oversight Committees are actively engaged in a thorough review of Michigan's election processes, and we have faith in the committee process to provide greater transparency. We have not yet been made aware of any information that would change the outcome of the election in Michigan, and as legislative leaders, we will follow the rule of law and follow the normal process regarding Michigan's electors, just as we have said throughout this election. So why is it that every state that Trump talks to, many of which he's talking to his own allies and supporters, Republicans, not the squad, are telling him there's no fraud, and he keeps telling his followers there's fraud? He knowingly is spreading lies. Is that okay? Is this like the new normal? On December 1, the defendant raised his Michigan dump vote claim with the Attorney General, who responded that what had occurred in Michigan had been the normal vote counting process, and there was no indication of fraud in Detroit. Despite this, Trump made a knowingly false statement in Michigan. At 6:31 in the morning, a vote dump of 149,000 votes came in unexpectedly. We were winning by a lot. The batch was received in horror. Nobody knows anything about it. It's corrupt. Detroit is corrupt. I have a lot of friends in Detroit. They know it. But Detroit is totally corrupt. On December 4th, Co-Conspirator 1 sent a text message to the Michigan House Speaker reiterating his unsupported claim of fraud and attempting to get the Michigan House Speaker to assist, stating, "Looks like Georgia may well hold some factual hearings and change certification under Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution. As Co-Conspirator 2 explained, they just don't have the right to do it, but the obligation. Help me get this done in Michigan." Similarly, December 7th, despite having established no fraud in Michigan, Co-Conspirator 1 sent a text intended for Michigan Senate Majority Leader. "So I need you to pass a joint resolution from the Michigan legislature that states the election is in dispute. There's an ongoing investigation, and the electors sent by Governor Whitmer are not the official electors of the state of Michigan and do not fall within safe harbor deadline." On December 14th, the day that the electors in states across the country were required to submit their votes, the Michigan House Speaker and Michigan Senate Majority Leader announced that, contrary to Trump's request, they would not decertify the legitimate election results or electors in Michigan. The Michigan Senate Majority Leader's public statement included, "We have not received any evidence of fraud on a scale that would change the outcome of election in Michigan." The Michigan House Speaker's public statement read in part, "We have diligently examined these reports to the best of our ability. I fought hard for President Trump. Nobody wanted him to win more than I did. I think he's done an incredible job, but I love our republic too. I can't fathom risking our norms, traditions, institutions to pass a resolution retroactively changing the electors for Trump, simply because some think there may have been enough widespread fraud to give him the win. That's unprecedented for a good reason, and that's why there's not enough support in the House to cast a new slate of electors. I fear we lose our country forever. This truly would bring mutually assured destruction for every future election in regards to the Electoral College, and I can't stand for that. I won't." That's a Trump supporter. On January 6th, the defendant publicly repeated his claims regarding an illicit dump of more than 100,000 ballots in Detroit. On November 11th, Trump publicly maligned a Philadelphia city commissioner for stating on the news that there was no evidence of fraud. As a result, the commissioner and his family received death threats. On November 25th, the day after the Pennsylvania governor's signed certificate of ascertainment, Co-Conspirator 1 orchestrated an event at a hotel in Gettysburg attended by state legislators. Co-Conspirator 1 falsely claimed that Pennsylvania had issued 1.8 million absentee ballots and received 2.5 million in return. In the days thereafter, a campaign staffer wrote internally that co-conspirator one's allegation was just wrong and there's no way to defend it. The deputy Trump campaign manager responded, "We have been saying this for a while. It's very frustrating." On December 4th, after 4 Republican leaders of the Pennsylvania legislature issued a public statement that the General Assembly lacked the authority to overturn the popular vote and appoint its own slate of electors, Trump retweeted a post labeling the legislators cowards. God, this guy's exhausting. Even just reading about all the crap he does in every state where he loses. On December 31st and January 3rd, the defendant repeatedly raised with the acting attorney general and acting deputy attorney general the allegation that in Pennsylvania there had been 205,000 more votes than voters. Each time, the Justice Department informed Trump that his claim was false. Nevertheless, on Jan 6, Trump publicly repeated his knowingly false claim that there had been 205,000 more votes than voters in Pennsylvania. On November 29th, a recount in Wisconsin and Trump's campaign had petitioned and paid for did not change the election results, and in fact increased Trump's margin of defeat. So Wisconsin, a recount paid for by Trump, showed that Trump lost again, but this time by more. On December 14th, a Wisconsin Supreme Court rejected an election challenge by the campaign. One justice wrote, quote, "Nothing in this case casts any legitimate doubt that the people of Wisconsin lawfully chose Vice President Biden and Senator Harris to be the next leaders of our great country." On December 21, the Wisconsin governor, who had signed a certificate of ascertainment on November 30th, a signed certificate of final determination in which he recognized that the state Supreme Court had resolved the controversy regarding the appointment of Biden's electors and confirmed that Biden had received the highest number of votes in the state and that his electors were the state's legitimate electors. That same day, Trump issued a tweet repeating his knowingly false claim of fraud and demanding that the Wisconsin legislature overturn the results. On December 27th, the defendant raised with the acting attorney general and acting deputy attorney general another fraud claim. The acting deputy attorney general informed Trump that this claim too was false. On January 6th, Trump publicly repeated knowingly false claims. So basically, this is the pattern. There's like another 40 pages. It goes to page 40. I don't think we need to go through all of it. But basically, I think we can summarize now because we're approaching an hour. And you can just Google it, but I'll also put a link in the description. What's the TLDR? That this guy knew that everything he was saying was BS. He kept telling his followers that the election was stolen. His own team, his own supporters, his own endorsers, his own Republican allies all told him the same thing. They were unable to produce any evidence. And this is America in freaking 2020. Just crazy. So let me know in the comments if you think this was it's beneath contempt, this behavior. I mean, it's just sad. It's so sad. This man who talks about the Constitution and America and making America great and the rule of law and, trying to fight against these people who he says are anti-American. And in reality, he's the guy that literally cannot accept the fact that he lost, makes up evidence, and then tries to strong arm every state where he lost to change the results, is unable to win in a single court case. I mean, what more do you need? Now, if you found this review and unboxing interesting, I want you to do me a solid because you've already made it freaking 50 minutes, 55 minutes into this stream. Do me a solid and click the like button and subscribe and turn on your notifications. And I also want to take a moment to thank the people who make this channel possible. If you really like this content and you want to see more of it, consider becoming a member. And you'll also get a shout out from me on future streams. So let me give a shout out to the current members. And if you're watching this on YouTube, it's very easy. Just click the join link and you can be as awesome as Soldier One, our biggest supporter of the channel. He is a executive vice president. Thank you, Soldier One. Then next down is our vice presidents. They are Kristen Slevin and Bike. Kristen Slevin's been supporting the channel for 43 months. So thank you, Kristen. And Bike for 33 months. Then you've got Hardcore. In order of length of membership, Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Kirsch, Mr. History, Mona, Vaughn, Yang, Dean, Galessa, Jay Perrin, Dana, Jason, Daniel, Mickey, and Unkiyu. And then Verified Nerd, which is only $1.99 a month. You cancel anytime. Lisa, Brandon, Sophia, Doris, Emerald, Ben, Ira, Elizabeth, Shoni, Dr. William, Karen, Mai, Brittany, Lori, Wana, Kevin, T, Jeremy, David, Nicholas, Mike, Aurora, Zig, Roberto, and Jackson. And let's see who are our oldest and youngest nerds. Our oldest nerds overall are Lisa, Jean, Kristen, Brandon, and David. And our youngest nerds are Unkiyo, Jackson, and Roberto. So that's been a long stream. Hope you found it useful. Let me know in the comments if you think this activity by a sitting president after he loses a presidential election, trying after the election is over to reverse the results, using false evidence that he knows is made up, that everybody around him is telling him it's made up, is not true. Even his own campaign supporters are telling him, like, bro, you lost. And he basically incites a riot and a interference with the peaceful transfer of power. Is that what it means to be a patriot? Or is that what it means to be something else? So let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want to be super awesome, become a member. But at a minimum, smash the like button. Bye, nerds. Oh, I got to give the goodbye music. Okay, so let's get the goodbye music. Here we go. All right. So what are some other takeaways from this indictment? First of all, it kind of maps well to the Jan 6 congressional investigation. So, but it lays it out in a very detailed black and white manner, and it underscores this general theme that he knew he lost. He wanted to believe that he won, and then he told all of his followers that he won. And you could argue, like, well, he's just being a sore loser. It's fine. You could say he won, whatever. It's like losing the Super Bowl and blaming it on, like, Deflategate or whatever. But what's worse is that then he told and tried to pressure individual states to overturn their duly elected results. I mean, that's how the Electoral College works. You don't get to see the results and say, oh, I'm going to go call the Speaker of the House who's a Republican and tell him just to change the outcomes, or to create false electors and have fake certification documents. Like, if anything, that is the act of stealing an election. So that's my takeaways, but let me know if I'm being too hard on Trump, and see you next time. Bye, nerds.